Listen carefully, for what I am about to reveal is not about pleasure nor morality, nor even sin in the common sense. It is about power, your inner fire, the sacred energy that once guided prophets, poets, and warriors. There exists within every human being a reservoir of divine potency, the raw essence of creation itself. But most never touch it. They squander it, bleed it away through the invisible wounds of indulgence, shame, and unconscious desire. You feel it, don't you? That subtle exhaustion of the soul, that dull ache that follows your moments of secret gratification. It is not guilt, it is depletion. The chosen ones, those born to lead, to heal, to transform, cannot afford this loss. For each act that drains the sacred current weakens the link between the ego and the self, the human and the divine. Sexual. Energy is the bridge between worlds. Misuse it and you fall into the abyss. The first sin is ignorance, to believe that sex is merely physical. It is not. It is alchemy. When mind and body unite without spirit, the result is emptiness. The chosen one must awaken to the fact that every sexual impulse is a message from the unconscious, a call to transformation, not mere pleasure. The second sin is lust without love, the hunger that seeks to consume rather than create. Lust ungoverned becomes a parasite, feeding on your creative will. When you give your body to desire without consciousness, you make a sacrifice, not of pleasure, but of power. The third sin is shame, that silent killer of the soul. The modern world teaches repression as virtue, but repression is only the shadow of perversion. What is denied festers. The chosen one must not repress the sexual force, but sublimate it, transform it into art, wisdom, or spiritual strength. The fourth sin is addiction, the compulsive return to pleasure as escape. Pornography, fantasy, seduction, these are mirrors that reflect nothing. The more you stare, the less you see. Addiction corrodes the masculine principle of direction and the feminine principle of receptivity. It turns gods into beggars, priests into slaves. The fifth sin is betrayal of sacred union, using another's body without honoring their soul. Every encounter leaves a trace, an energetic signature. When you touch someone, you exchange more than fluids. You exchange fragments of your psyche. The chosen one must choose wisely whom they enter, for they are entering a temple. The sixth sin is fragmentation, dividing your inner masculine and feminine. The anima and animus, the inner woman and inner man, must be reconciled. Those who chase external partners to complete their inner imbalance will never know peace. Sexual mastery begins with inner marriage. Only then can outer love mirror divine union. And the seventh sin, the most subtle of all, is forgetfulness, forgetting who you are. You are not born to chase pleasure, but to wield it. You are a vessel of creation, a conduit for the divine fire that moves galaxies and gives birth to stars. When you remember this, every breath becomes erotic, every glance sacred, every touch divine. Free yourself now, not through denial, but through remembrance. Reclaim the seed of your being, guard it, grow it, transmute it into vision, into courage, into light. Let your sexuality no longer be a chain but a sword, sharp, radiant, and pure. For the chosen ones are not those who reject the flesh, but those who redeem it. And once you awaken to that truth, you will understand. Your desire was never your enemy. It was your guide leading you back to the divine source from which you came. Ignorance is not merely the absence of knowledge. It is a psychic blindness, a refusal to look into the deeper meaning of our most primal drives. When it comes to sexuality, ignorance takes a particularly seductive form. We believe we understand it because we experience it. Yet what we call sexual desire is not just a biological urge. It is a coded message from the unconscious, an invitation to encounter the divine within ourselves. Most people never decode this message. They take the symbol for the thing itself. They live at the surface, mistaking pleasure for fulfillment and instinct for truth. Sexual energy is the oldest language of the soul. Before words, before gods, there was the pulse, the life force that seeks union, that drives all creation forward. To treat that sacred current as a mere chemical reaction is to strip it of its mystery and power. Jung once said that what we repress or trivialize does not vanish, it turns against us. So when we ignore the symbolic meaning of sexuality, it doesn't disappear. It manifests as obsession, confusion, shame, or exhaustion. The modern individual is drowning in stimulation, yet starving for connection, because we have separated the physical act from its psychological and spiritual dimension. To awaken from this ignorance, one must begin to see that every desire conceals a deeper longing, not simply for the body of another, but for wholeness, for union with the lost parts of the self. This is the root of all erotic experience. When you crave another person, you are in truth seeking reunion with the unlived aspects of your own being. The beloved becomes a mirror of your divine potential. To know this is to approach sexuality with reverence rather than hunger, awareness rather than compulsion. The tragedy of ignorance is that it leads us to misuse the most potent force in existence. We become like children playing with lightning, unaware of what we hold. Each act of unconscious indulgence dissipates energy that could have been transmuted into creativity, intuition, or spiritual insight. The chosen ones, those called to awaken, must recognize that the sexual act is not the end of desire, but the beginning of transformation. When mind and body align under the guidance of spirit, passion becomes prayer, and pleasure becomes illumination. To free oneself from ignorance is not to deny sexuality, but to dignify it, to bring it out of the shadows and into the light of consciousness. This requires courage, honesty, and patience. You must question every impulse. What is it I truly seek? What part of me is calling out through this desire? When you begin to see your instincts as sacred messengers rather than enemies or indulgences, ignorance loses its power. Remember this: the energy that creates life is the same energy that can transform it. Your sexuality is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be understood. When you understand it, you cease to be a prisoner of your impulses. You become their master. And mastery of desire is mastery of destiny. Lust without love is a hunger without meaning, a flame that burns but gives no light. It is one of the most deceptive of all human impulses because it mimics intimacy while denying its essence. Lust, in itself, is not evil. It is raw energy, the unrefined gold of the psyche. But when it operates without love, without consciousness, it becomes parasitic, consuming rather than creating. It drains the soul because it seeks satisfaction in the external, while the true object of desire lies within. You see, the body's yearning is not merely for another body. It is the soul's attempt to recover its missing half, to reunite with what it has projected outward. Jung understood this profoundly. Every object of desire is a symbol. When we lust after someone, we are chasing a reflection of an unintegrated aspect of ourselves. But instead of recognizing the message, most people mistake the symbol for reality. They try to possess the other, to consume them, to dissolve the ache through physical union, yet the hunger only grows. Because what the unconscious seeks is not possession, but integration. In the absence of love, that is, without awareness, empathy, or soul connection, lust turns destructive. It fragments the psyche. Each encounter pursued merely for pleasure reinforces the illusion that satisfaction lies outside the self. The more we chase, the more divided we become and the further we drift from the center of our being. Love, on the other hand, is integration in motion. It does not consume, it completes. When sexuality is guided by love, desire becomes a bridge between the human and the divine. It transcends the body and touches eternity. The modern world glorifies lust as freedom, as proof of vitality. But in truth, unchecked lust is bondage. It binds you to repetition, to endless craving without fulfillment. It makes you reactive rather than creative. When the chosen ones waste their sacred energy in this cycle, their vision blurs, their will weakens, their purpose fades. The energy that could give birth to art, revelation, or spiritual clarity is poured into transient pleasures that leave only emptiness in their wake. To redeem lust, you must not destroy it. You must illuminate it. Bring awareness to the impulse. Ask what it wants to show you about yourself. Often beneath lust lies loneliness, fear, or the need for validation. When you see this truth, the fire changes its nature. What once consumed you begins to enlighten you. Love transforms lust from a craving for possession into a longing for union, not with another person, but with the divine essence that animates all. True mastery is not abstinence nor indulgence, it is consciousness. It is the ability to feel the full intensity of desire without being ruled by it. When you can stand in the fire of passion and remain centered, desire becomes power. It becomes creation. Remember this: lust without love drains, but love transforms. The same energy that enslaves the unconscious can, when awakened, liberate the soul. Choose, then, not to suppress your fire, but to sanctify it, so that every act of passion becomes an act of awakening. Shame is a poison that seeps into the roots of the soul, silencing the most vital parts of our being. It is not the natural outcome of morality, but the shadow cast by repression. From the moment we are taught that our sexual energy is dangerous, dirty, or unworthy, we begin to fracture within ourselves. The instinctive life, our raw, creative, erotic force, is forced into hiding. And what is buried in the unconscious does not die. It festers, twisting itself into forms of guilt, secrecy, and inner conflict. Shame becomes the invisible chain that binds the chosen ones, preventing them from awakening their full power. The tragedy of shame lies in its subtlety. It disguises itself as virtue, as restraint, as discipline. Yet beneath that mask, it whispers the lie that there is something inherently wrong with who you are and what you feel. Jung taught that the parts of ourselves we deny become part of the shadow, the hidden aspect of the psyche that contains all we reject. Sexual shame is one of the deepest and most toxic shadows of the human condition. It traps divine energy in a prison of self-condemnation. The individual then lives torn between desire and denial, craving freedom yet fearing it. But repression is not purity, it is distortion. What is denied in consciousness reappears in dreams, fantasies, and compulsions. This is why societies obsessed with controlling sexuality often produce the most secret perversions. The psyche demands balance, and what is not lived out consciously will erupt unconsciously. The chosen one must understand. To repress the sexual force is to repress life itself. The task is not to destroy the instinct, but to redeem it, to bring it into the light of awareness, to give it meaning. When you confront shame directly, you begin to see that it was never your enemy, but a distorted guardian of your inner truth. It arose to protect you from rejection, judgment, and pain. But as long as it rules you, your creative power remains locked away. The energy that could heal, inspire, or create remains bound by fear. Healing begins the moment you dare to face the forbidden parts of yourself without condemnation. Look at your desires without flinching. Listen to what they are trying to tell you. You will discover that they are not asking for sin, but for wholeness, for the freedom to exist without shame. When you integrate what was once hidden, the energy once trapped in guilt becomes fuel for transformation. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, create differently, because the war within you ends. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means acceptance, and only in acceptance can true transcendence arise. Remember this. Shame is not proof of sin, but evidence of disconnection. The divine never condemned your desire. It only asked you to understand it. When you no longer hide from yourself, the sacred and the sensual merge. In that union, you recover the power that shame once stole, and you become whole again. Addiction is not about pleasure. It is about escape. It is the soul's cry for relief from an inner emptiness it cannot name. When the chosen ones fall into the cycle of sexual addiction, whether through compulsive desire, fantasy, or the endless consumption of stimulation, they are not chasing ecstasy. They are running from themselves. What begins as curiosity or comfort soon becomes bondage. For addiction is not driven by hunger but by avoidance. It is the shadow's attempt to fill a void that only consciousness can heal. At the core of every addiction lies a rupture between instinct and awareness. Sexual energy, when unconscious, seeks expression through repetition. The psyche becomes addicted not to the act itself, but to the temporary illusion of relief it provides. In those moments of indulgence, the ego forgets its suffering. It dissolves briefly into sensation. But the moment passes, leaving behind a deeper hunger and a greater sense of loss. The more one feeds the craving, the more it grows. For addiction thrives on absence, the absence of meaning, purpose, and inner stillness. Jung understood that addiction is a form of possession. The individual becomes inhabited by an autonomous complex, a fragment of the psyche that takes control, repeating patterns beyond the will's reach. In sexual addiction, this complex wears the mask of desire but serves the function of control. It traps the person in a loop of longing and regret, draining psychic energy that could be used for creation, love, or spiritual insight. What was once an expression of vitality becomes a mechanism of decay. Modern culture only deepens this enslavement. It glorifies stimulation while denying depth, offering constant access to pleasure without presence. Technology amplifies temptation, making the sacred energy of sex a commodity of distraction. The chosen ones, those sensitive enough to feel the spiritual cost, find themselves torn between instinct and intention. Yet within this tension lies the seed of transformation. For addiction, when illuminated, becomes a teacher. It exposes where we have abandoned ourselves. It shows us what we seek to numb, and in doing so, points to the wound that must be healed. To transcend addiction, one must replace escape with engagement. Instead of fleeing from the emptiness, we must enter it consciously. Sit with the craving, not to suppress it, but to understand it. Behind every compulsive urge lies a spiritual thirst, a longing for union, for belonging, for meaning. When you recognize that what you truly seek is not pleasure but connection with your own essence, the spell begins to break. Awareness dissolves the compulsion because it reclaims ownership of the energy that addiction had stolen. To transform the addictive impulse is to turn the energy of escape into the energy of awakening. The same fire that consumed you can now illuminate you. It requires honesty, courage, and discipline to stand before your craving and say, "I will not run." In that moment, you reclaim the throne of your own psyche. Remember this: addiction is the shadow's imitation of transcendence. It promises freedom but delivers chains. Only through consciousness can you break the cycle. When you learn to channel your desire rather than be ruled by it, your greatest weakness becomes your greatest power. The very force that once enslaved you becomes the energy that sets you free. To betray sacred union is to treat the human body as an object rather than a temple, to enter another without reverence for the soul that dwells within. Every sexual encounter, whether fleeting or enduring, is an exchange of psychic substance, an intertwining of energies that leaves an imprint on both participants. We often imagine that sex can be casual, separate from meaning, untouched by spirit, but this is an illusion. The psyche records everything. The body may forget, but the soul remembers. When you give yourself to another without awareness, you leave fragments of your energy behind and take fragments of theirs with you. Over time, this scattering of essence weakens the inner structure of the self, leaving one restless, disconnected, and spiritually thin. The chosen ones cannot afford to live so carelessly. Their energy is sacred currency, meant to be invested, not squandered. When sexual union is entered without consciousness or emotional integrity, the act ceases to be creative. It becomes consumptive. It feeds the ego's desire for possession and power, not the soul's longing for communion. And in that inversion, something holy is lost. The encounter that could have been a merging of divinity becomes merely a transaction of need and fantasy. Jung understood that the other person in a relationship is always, in some way, an image of the self. When we unite with another, we are in part encountering our own unconscious projected outward. To misuse that encounter is to misuse one's own psyche. It is not only a betrayal of the other's soul, but of your own inner process of individuation, the sacred task of becoming whole. Sexual betrayal, then, is not merely infidelity to another. It is infidelity to the self. It fractures trust within the psyche and severs the bridge between eros and spirit. To honor sacred union is to approach the act of love as a ritual of awareness. This does not require solemnity or restraint, but presence. It asks that you see the other not as a means to pleasure, but as a mirror of your divine essence. When you enter another with reverence, you enter the mystery of creation itself. The energy exchange becomes luminous, regenerative. It heals rather than drains. It awakens rather than binds. This is why true intimacy can elevate consciousness. It allows two souls to briefly remember their shared origin in the divine. But this level of union demands vulnerability and integrity. It requires that both partners stand before each other without masks, without manipulation, willing to be seen in their truth. Only then does sex transcend instinct and become sacrament. The chosen ones must reclaim this understanding, for their destiny depends upon the purity of their energetic field. They must learn to touch not with hunger, but with awareness, not to possess, but to honor. Remember this, every union either elevates or depletes you. Each encounter is a choice between awakening and forgetting. Treat every soul you touch as sacred, and you will never lose your power in the act of love. You will multiply it.